There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel and another Saskatoon Library book vlog. I haven't done one of these for a while. I had intentions of doing one in the winter and didn't do it partially because I never go outside in the winter. I had other pressing personal matters that waylaid the plans as well. But I'm also not going to worry about having too much outdoor footage, or the weather is now almost to the point. Like, I think within a few days I'll be able to film outside. So that might be the extent of it. But Saskatoon, you know, the places I go to, you've seen a million times. So I'm not going to clutter this library book vlog up with repetitive footage. And I have another half dozen books that I took out of two libraries yesterday, the University of Saskatchewan Library and the branch library of the city library down the street. First, this was on the new release shelf at the University Library, and I was drawn to the cover. Look at that. It's a beautiful book, and unlike the public library, which it's a crime against nature, who put their stickers right on the front cover, that's an unblemished cover, and I'm sure I'm the first person to sign it up from the library. It is a modern classic of Czech literature, of Mice and Mooshaber by Ladislav Fuks. I will look up the pronunciation before I check in on it again. This edition is 2014, translation by Mark Corner. Wow, they're not very good. They don't even have the translator's name on the title page. It's down in the copyright page. Illustrations by Jiri Gruus, and it is quite beautifully illustrated throughout. First published 1970, just at the time that the fucking Soviets, Russians, started the repression that came after the August 1968 Moscow-led military intervention in communist Czechoslovakia. It's set in an unnamed futuristic Central European setting. I'm intrigued, so I'll be dipping into that and let you know what I think. And here is a novel from the Middle East. The author, Ahdaf, I have no idea how to pronounce her name.
Ahdaf Soueif.
Ahdaf Soueif, and she's an Egyptian writer. And this novel is called The Map of Love. English publication, 1999. Oh, and I think she wrote it in English. There's no reference to a translator. Well, it makes me just as bad when they do that. So the University Library did that. So I can't read the synopsis. This is her debut novel, shortlisted for the Booker Prize. There's two storylines. At either end of the 20th century, both of the protagonists are women who fall in love outside of their class or their cultural group. 1901, and the second timeline is closer to the end of the 20th century. Well, that sounds pretty interesting. I've never read this famous book by Sillitoe, The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Runner, probably because it's about exercising. It's kind of a turn-off, the concept. I fell asleep trying to read Murakami Haruki's What We Talk About When We Talk About Running. I find all of his nonfiction very sleep-inducing. But is this actually about long-distance running? Oh, it's short fiction. I didn't even know that. And I don't even know where Sillitoe is from. Is he British? He is no longer with us. And he was an English writer. One of the so-called angry young men of the 50s. I didn't even know that much about him. He died in 2010, age 82. So, short stories. Yay. I'll read the title story for sure and tell you what I think of it. Here is a novel, fairly recent, by a Taiwanese-American novelist. Activities of Daily Living by Hsiao Chen. 2022. It's described as being about the interconnections between work and life, loneliness and kinship, and the projects that occupy our time. Well, those are big topics. Maybe that's why it's such a long novel. This one is by an author that I've read and really loved her other novel. It's called The Hero's Walk by Anita Badami. And I read her Can You Hear the Nightbird Call? And I think I might have even read it twice. I think I might have. Anyway, I once sat beside Anita Badami at some event at the Vancouver Writers Festival back in the day, and we had quite a conversation. This came out in 2000. It's set in a fictional town on the Bay of Bengal. And finally, this is a fairly new release that I saw on Twitter, and I think it might have even been a glowing review from Ronan Hession, but I may have that wrong. I See Buildings Fall Like Lightning by Keiran Goddard. On his own website, he describes himself as a British writer, and this novel is his most recent offering. Came out in a Europa edition this year. Yeah, it is quite new. It's about 5 childhood friends in the same housing estate in England. That sounds fantastic. So what I do, if you're new to these vlogs, what I do is I read the first chapter or the first 20 pages or something, and then I check in, give my gut feeling, and then I rank them from favorite to least favorite, just based on that little taste. So let's see how it goes, shall we? Hey, well, it's about a month later. I haven't just had too many things on to make progress with this, but have cleared a space to do this, and I'm really stoked to begin, finally. I have read the first chunk of the first story in this short story collection, Alan Sillitoe's The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Runner, originally published in 1959. The title story is actually about 40 pages, so I didn't read all of it. I only read about the first 10 or 12, or maybe whatever, something like that, just enough to know that I absolutely love the voice. So this is one I'm definitely going to read at some point. I guess it's actually one of the most famous, certainly influential, short stories of the 20th century. And the voice is incredible. A young lad in an Essex Borstal, if I'm pronouncing that right, which is a juvenile detention center. He's maybe 12 or 14, and he's allowed to leave the prison grounds every morning at about 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. to go to practice his running, and there's nobody supervising him. They know he's not going to run away. He knows he's not going to run away. And the way he describes that kind of psychological bargain, or actually psychosocial bargain that they have with him that doesn't even need to be stated aloud, is so wonderfully expressed in these fabulously spidery sentences. I just really enjoyed what I read. He appreciates the freedom of the long distance runs, and he waxes philosophical in the most wonderful, it's not dialect, because I don't really like reading dialect, but kind of a lower class voice, and it's all about class. And he has just this wonderful insights into class in the UK, and in terms of like the governor of the Borstal and the sports day when the dukes and duchesses and the hoity-toity people come, and he's got them all figured out, and he does all his thinking, or certainly all his best thinking, on these, I don't know what they are, hour-long morning runs. I'm going to read you one short section to give you a sense of the voice. And this is one where he's reflecting on class, and that the people who have the power over him, they're dead inside, but he's alive. Maybe as soon as you get the whip hand over somebody, you do go dead. By God, to say that last sentence has needed a few 100 miles of long-distance running. I could no more have said that, at first, than I could have took a £1 million note from my back pocket. But it's true, you know, now I think of it again, and has always been true, and always will be true. And I'm sure of it every time I see the governor open the door and say, "Good morning, lads." I will definitely finish the story and read the entire collection in due course. All right, well, it's a cool, cloudy day, and it's supposed to be raining off and on during the day, so this might be the closest I get to filming outside. I have now previewed this one, Activities of Daily Living by Hsiao Chen, a 2022 novel, and I'm finding it absolutely fascinating. I hadn't heard anything about the book. Not a lot of my Goodreads friends have read it, but it's got a 3.85 rating on Goodreads, if that means anything at all. I think it means something. Its reading so far is autofiction, which is not a bad thing in my books, and the protagonist has undertaken a project. She is very intellectually curious about what projects are and what they mean to artists and human beings, and that has led her to embark on a project. I think it's a writing project. I think it's the novel that I've had a taste of, to study or come to grips with the Taiwanese-American performance artist Sam Hsiao. He jumped off he kind of was a stowaway, he jumped off the frigate, or whatever the name of those boats are that transport things across the Ocean and swam into New York City and came because he wanted to become an artist. And he got into performance art, and he's really famous. I'd never heard of him. I didn't think I was all that interested in performance art. Now I am, and I'm interested in this intellectual. It's not theorizing, because I know theory, and theory makes me fall asleep, but usually I puke and then I fall asleep. This is not overly theoretical, but she's citing a lot of thinkers or artists about what a project is. Got me very curious about that and how projects have fit into my life, because you could group certain short-term interests where you do a certain amount of things about something, and certainly a lot of my booktubing could be seen as various projects. I also come up with ideas for projects for my booktube channel. Many, many, many more than ever come to fruition. So all of that has been swirling in my mind as I've been reading about Sam Hsiao and the author. So after I read about 10 pages, I Googled, and yes, Sam Hsiao is still alive and is a real person. You can find interviews with him. And I think almost all of his works of performance art involve a year-long project. So the first one was he was locked in a cage in his apartment for a year, and he never left. He never conversed. He didn't read. He didn't talk on the phone. He didn't do anything. A friend brought food and took away waste. But other than that, he stayed in his cage in his room for a year. Another one, he took a picture of himself every day, I think at the same time, punching a time clock for a year. And then those photos became the performance art. None of the actual performances that he's done so far seem at all interesting to me, but yet I am absolutely fascinated by what I'm reading. And I have read a little bit more about the book to know that eventually the protagonist, who may or may not be the author, also takes on a second project, which is to understand her stepdad better. Hsiao Chen is a Taiwanese-American writer, lives in New York, and as far as I am aware, this is her debut, and I am absolutely fascinated by this. So let me read you a paragraph. This gives you a sense of the writing and a little bit more about Sam Hsiao, who is referred to as the artist, capital A artist. You could say the artist's performance works, his extreme acts of physical and mental endurance, are the heavyweights of projects, the kaiju of projects. And I looked up kaiju, and that's the name of the genre of monster movies like King Kong. Kaiju. The kaiju of projects. A lazy twitch from the tail of one of his projects could level a metropolis of lesser projects. Yet for most of his career, he remained an underground figure for all the usual reasons. He didn't become famous the way other artists synonymous with the downtown art scene of the 80s became famous. Basquiat, Herring, Sherman, Schnabel. He didn't share a booth with Warhol at Max's Kansas City. He didn't do lines in the unisex restroom at the Mud Club. He was in and of the margins, one of a loose community of artists who made up an alternative to the alternative art scene. Very few people had actually witnessed any of his performances, but the truth was, you didn't need to. You could be standing on a tenement rooftop at a party, listening to a stranger describe in an incredulous, conspiratorial tone what the artist had done, and forget about him for years, only to have a casual mention uncover the memory, like the sound of a mountain. Well, I just find a lot of those sentences, a lot of those turns of phrase were just gasp-worthy, and I think this is a book that I need to read from cover to cover someday. Hey, well, I'm ready to check in on this new release, I See Buildings Fall Like Lightning by Keiran Goddard. I wasn't sure in the first few pages. It's borderline dialect, but no, I just needed a few pages to get into the voice, and then I absolutely loved it. I read about 15 pages. This is about a group of childhood friends who are now around 30, and they grew up on an estate outside Birmingham in England. Most of them are still there, but one of them Ryan has gotten rich, and I'm not sure how, whether that was by ill-gotten gains or legit, it doesn't matter. Well, I guess it matters, but I don't know that. And so far it's centering around one of the most popular people in the group, Ollie, and it's his 30th birthday. He is a beautiful man, he is a drug dealer, and he's also a really severe drug addict. Everybody loves him, and at least one character, Ryan, is worried about him. I'm going to share with you a few sentences about his concern for Ollie. He's gone to visit him. Ollie used to be just a stunningly beautiful man. I don't think there's anything gay in the way Ryan's describing him. There may be, I don't know. He certainly described him as having always been beautiful, but getting a little bit greasy looking. A few months back I went round to his, and if I'm honest, for the first time you really had to squint to see his beauty. His body had thinned right out. The poor fucker looked a bit like a baseball bat with a sad face drawn on it. He'd got himself a dog, which seemed like a stupid idea to me. But Ollie seemed proud of the dog, so I let it lick my hand and leave that thick, gone-off soup smell on my fingers. At some point, the dog got bored and started trying to eat a fly that had landed on the coffee table. I can't really explain why, but watching that dog lap at that tiny fly with its fat, inaccurate tongue was probably even worse than seeing Ollie looking the way he did. That gives you a taste of the writing. It's told from multiple perspectives of the members of this group. One of them is a woman married to a man in the group, and they have a family. That's all that I can say about it, other than I was immediately, once I got over the kind of weird voice, I was completely hooked. It reminds me a bit of, what's that Scottish writer, Andrew Scott of Gunpowder Fiction and Plot's favorite book that I read and loved almost as much as he did, about assisted suicide. Mayflies? Andrew, that guy, it kind of reminds me a bit of that. And I can't wait to read this. This was a big success for yours truly. Alright, well, here I am. I'm hoping my mic works as well as I remember it working, because it's a windy day and I'm sitting beside a busy street. So, I'm here to check in on this Egyptian novel, Ahdaf Soueif's The Map of Love. It was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. It was published in 1999. Oh boy, I enjoyed this. This is going to be possibly my best library book vlog yet, because so far I'm really taken with each of the ones I've tried. This one no less than the others. I'm going to have a dickens of a time ranking them at the end. Two storylines that are very closely connected, and you get this connection between the two storylines. One's in 1997. The other one is, where am I supposed to look? There, I think. No, just at the camera, I think. Jesus. The other one is 1897. There's an American journalist in 1997 who has an interesting concept that she wants to test out. That the turn of the millennium, means a lot more to Americans because their country is so young than it might in a country that is much, much older. And so she decides she's going to, I assume she has to get her editor's permission or whatever, but she goes to Egypt to interview Egyptians to see if the turning of the millennium means anything at all to them. And before she goes, she is at a dinner party with an Egyptian music conductor, and she is intensely attracted to him, and he sets her up with his sister in maybe Cairo, but certainly Egypt. So that is one of the first interviewees that this female American journalist meets. She brings with her to Egypt a box of keepsakes that her mother, who had recently died of Alzheimer's, has, that is about her family, and we don't get many details, but it's about her family, her aunt's great-grandmother's stuff. And so I'm already getting excerpts from 1897, and there is an interracial love affair, probably adulterous, between this journalist's great-grandmother, perhaps, I'm not sure exactly, and an Egyptian man. It's not raising any alarms for me that it's going to be too romantic or whatever. There's a lot of politics in it already, anti-colonial, post-colonial, all of that stuff. It's a time of my life, the turning of the millennium, that, it's not too far in the past. I have pretty vivid memories of it. All of that is interesting to me. The writing is gorgeous. And the fact that this dual timeline is I already understand it. I think it would be the kind of novel that I would just fall into. Ahdaf Soueif, I think she might live in the UK now, but I'm not 100% sure. She certainly was born and raised in Cairo and has written many books. And I don't think any of them have been... I think she writes in English. She's also very political and has written lots of fiction and non-fiction about Palestine. And she founded the Palestinian Literary Festival some years ago. She is a writer for those reasons as well that I very much look forward to reading. This was a big hit for me. Have any of you read it? Hey, well, I have now read the first chapter of this Czech novel of Mice and Mooshaber by Ladislav Fuks. Let's see if I can find out how to pronounce his name.
Fuks.
I think it's Fuks, but if anybody knows what the Czech pronunciation of that surname would be, my God, this one's grabbed me too. I'm going to tell you what happened in the first chapter because it's so fascinating. I want to keep reading. I can't. I'm maxed out at my 15 books, but this one, it's not that I know that I'm going to love this novel, but I'm so curious about this first chapter. So it was written in about 1968, not published in Czech until 1970, by which time the communists has taken over, and it's set in a vaguely futuristic setting under a dictatorship. So I'd like to know more about the publication history, how it was possible to publish a novel that was ostensibly anti-dictatorship in Soviet-controlled Czechoslovakia, but be that as may, none of that kind of comes into the first chapter. The first chapter is at a wedding in this, I don't know if it's a town or a village. I didn't get any of that context, but it is the roughest group of people at the pub after the wedding. The wedding party is it's ridiculous. It's like Czechoslovakian Beverly Hillbillies. The bride, she's blonde-haired and just seemingly really inappropriate in the way she's laughing at all the wrong times and this and that. And her groom seems befuddled by everything going on around him. He just seems like a country oaf, but genial. There's maybe a dozen people at the table. And then at the far end is Mrs. Mooshaber of the title. And it takes a long time for us to learn that she's the mother of the bride. And she is strange. She's talking to two young men that she doesn't seem to know. And by the end of the first chapter, I'm not sure who they are or why they were there. But they're two young men that she talks to through the whole chapter, talking about her life and gradually revealing that she's the mother of the bride. And one of the things she tells them early on is that she made the dessert for the wedding banquet, such as it will be. Kolaches. Kolaches, here's a picture of what they look like. And she's spent the whole day, the day before or whatever, baking them. And she's really poor, she insists. They usually eat oatmeal at their house, but she has made the dessert for the wedding banquet. And there's going to be a catered lunch that's going to be extremely extravagant. Ham and salad and so on. And she says she hasn't eaten ham or salad in 50 years. But she made the kolaches or whatever those are. We go back and forth between various little conversations happening around the table. And the other thing that's really important and really vividly described in the first paragraph is that the pub window is open and there's a horse out there. And for some reason, you just feel like, oh, this is going to mean something eventually. Well, you just wait. And then we find out through various conversations that the bride and groom are actually not planning to live together. And that sounds kind of strange to the people thus assembled, and it's not explained why, but the bride is going to stay with her mother, Mrs. Mooshaber, and the groom in some, I don't know, rental room and board type place. Maybe they don't have enough money to get it. I think they're planning to save up money until they can get a place. I think that much is specified. But the vibe of this wedding party is just weird, and Mrs. Mooshaber keeps talking to these young men that she doesn't know and that we don't know, talking about how poor she is and her various activities. She's very busy with some kind of a child welfare program, and she also has taken on a job as the caretaker of the cemetery. And so we get a lot of detail about that, but we don't really get a sense of who are these people, what are their connections to them, why is she sitting so far away and there's very little interaction between her and her daughter and son-in-law, nor does she seem especially, moved that her daughter has gotten hitched. It's just weird and fascinating. The big lunch, the ham and the salad and everything comes, and the whatever those pastries were that she made are all put down, and she's bragging about them. And the daughter, the bride, every plate has already been served up, and she puts a plate at everybody's seat except her mother, Mrs. Mooshaber, who has nothing. Editing Sean here. Out of an abundance of caution, I just want to clarify that the pronoun she in this next part is referring to the daughter, not her mother, Mrs. Mooshaber. And then she tells her to get the hell out of the party, to leave. And then she picks up the big tray of her pastries, whatever, the goulash, whatever those were, and throws them out the freaking window. And the horse starts eating them. And so Mrs. Mooshaber leaves under those circumstances. And these two young men, who we don't know who they are, they chase after her. I thought, because they're moved, they feel so badly for her. It was really humiliating and awful. But then the very last line of the chapter is, they passed by a house. Mrs. Mooshaber was hiding behind the house because she didn't want to see them, and then she walked home by herself. And that's where the chapter ends. Oh my God! Just really grabbed me. Anyway, so yeah, this one's a keeper too. I mean, not a keeper. This one is the one that I want to read someday too. All right, here's my final check-in. I'm a little bit rushed because I'm going to the farm tomorrow, and I want to get this edited and posted while I'm away, if I can, so I have something to watch while I'm gone for about 4 days. I have now sampled Anita Badami's novel, The Hero's Walk, and if you're paying attention, you might notice this is not a library book. I realized, such a dolt, that I already had a copy of this book. I didn't need to sign it out from the library. I bought it at a used book sale a couple of years ago because I loved her Nightbird Sing novel, and so I wanted to try this. So now I have tried it. I've already returned the library book to the library, and here I am with my own copy. I read about a dozen pages, and because I'm pressed for time, I wanted to read more, actually, so I loved what I read, but I didn't get much of the story. I got enough to know that I want to keep reading. Interestingly, this is a bit of a Marmite book. It's her second novel, so it's the one just before Can You Hear the Nightbird Call? 2001, apparently. Is that right? My edition is 2000, so 2000. It's a family in India, a seaside town on the Bay of Bengal. I'm just going to take a wild guess. It's in the Indian state of Odisha, which is where Anita Badami grew up, but I don't know that for sure. It's a fictional town. I did Google that, and the only thing that came up was references to this novel. And it's a middle-class family. The father, Sripati, is a copywriter, which isn't a very lucrative profession from what I gather in these first dozen pages. And he seems to have a fairly normal family, a wife and 2 kids. His daughter is married and living in Canada. And the phone rings, and he's busy. He's busy reading the paper and writing notes or underlining things that he's interested in. I think his son is sleeping, and his wife, who knows where she is, and his mother is too old to, who lives upstairs, I think, is too old to get up and answer the phone. And we are told by the narrator that this phone call is going to report a tragedy, but nobody answers the phone. So that was really quite genius, I thought. So I still don't know what the tragedy is, except I actually do know, because the stupid synopsis on the freaking inside flap told me. I mean, it told me a little bit about it. I didn't want to know anything about it. I wanted to just discover it. So I'm not even going to tell you what I read, because, God, those synopsises are the worst thing about modern literature. There shouldn't be any. Digress. Sripati, the father, he seems like a real character. He doesn't have much investment or derive much stature from his job, but he puts all of his energy into writing letters to the editor, and they get published, and he's really proud of himself. The best thing I read in these dozen pages was that when they got a TV for the first time, it had an internal antenna, and it didn't require an antenna on the house. And his mother, I don't know how old she is, he's early 50s, I think. His mother, who lives with them, she was really angry. She said, "What's the good of having a TV if none of our neighbors can see that we have one?" He said, "Well, we could watch it." I love Anita Badami's writing. Oh, and I started to say that this had mixed reviews. So the 3.73, that's not bad, but when I look at The first one of my friends, who's Rachel, I'm not sure who that is, 3 stars. The second one, Jen, 3 stars. A Melanie and a Renee, 4 stars. Leah, Katie, who I definitely know, and Leah. Oh, that's my dear friend Leah from Calgary. Gave it 4 stars. A Beata, one of my long-term followers, gave it 4 stars. So I'm expecting I'm going to love it. Because I just have had such good... I just loved Can You Hear the Nightbird Call? And it wasn't a perfect novel either. In fact, I gave it 4 stars, and I should probably mark up that to 5 stars because of how fondly I remember it and how often I think back to it. And I'm not going to tell it here because this video is long enough, but I do have a awkward author... It wasn't even all that awkward. I do have an author encounter, a memorable one, with Anita Badami. Well, I should just give it to you in one sentence. When I went to a reading at the Vancouver Writers' Festival years ago, I sat beside her, but I didn't know her, and I hadn't read any of her books. But my mum loved this book, Can You Hear the Nightbird Call? And so we started talking, and she asked me what I did, and I asked her what she did, and she said she's a writer. I said, oh, would I know your name? And she told me. I said, oh my God, my mum loves your book. So that was lovely. So I should track her down for an interview sometime. But first, I'm going to read The Hero's Walk. All right. This is going to be really difficult. I typically end the video by ranking the books, but here, it's almost pointless. You've heard how enthusiastic I was about each and every book. But if I had to say, what are the top 2 books that you would be most likely to read first, I think I can choose. But it's still difficult. I would choose this Czech novel, Ladislav Fuks of Mice and Mooshaber, translated from the Czech by Mark Homer. That first chapter was so gripping, I want to know what happened next. I may not end up loving the novel as much as I was gripped by that first chapter, but I know that I need to find out, and find out soon. And this one really captured my imagination in a way that... In a kind of autofictional way and with a kind of a theme of projects. It sounds kind of dweeby, but it really grabbed my imagination. Activities of Daily Living by Chen. I haven't been able to stop thinking about this. But I'm almost equally excited to try the other one, so maybe the next one would be the 2024 novel from Birmingham in the UK, I See Buildings Fall Like Lightning by Keiran Goddard. This one really grabbed me too. The voice was incredible. And this is all really subjective, obviously. I'm Sean the Book Maniac. There is no such thing as objective literary reactions or criticism or reviews, so have I made that pronouncement recently? The beginning of this famous story, The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Runner by Sillitoe, that was the title story in this collection, really grabbed me too. So again, talking about voice, and it was originally published in 1959. Yeah, that one really grabbed me, and I really want to see how that story progresses. I'm passionate about this one too, but it's my last choice because I love them all. You might notice that I didn't actually put the Anita Badami, The Hero's Walk, in this ranking, and I guess I would put it near the end, but like I say, I love them all. The Egyptian novel, The Map of Love by Ahdaf, Soueif, that I think it's coming last, and I still am dying to read it because I'm worried it might be too much about the 2 romances of the 2 main couples, and that might be a bit of a turn-off, but I don't think so. I love the writing, so yeah, this was the best library book haul I've ever had. This library book vlog was quite devoid of any footage, and that's probably how my library book vlogs are going to be, because I don't go out. And if I go out to all the same places. I will show you when I go to the library. I'll show you the new releases. If I get to a bookstore, I'll show you the new releases. But there's nothing else. There's nowhere else in Saskatoon that I go. And I just am not the kind of person to travel somewhere in the city that I've never been, or that I don't usually go to, or that's a bit of a pain to get to, just to make footage. So from now on, my library book vlogs are going to be very focused on the books, and that's it. Anyway, this was fun. Which of these would you be most likely to pick up based on my dips therein? Thanks for watching.